Sorry for the late episode. I'm back home and I needed to spend time with my family because I really haven't seen them in a while. I was at school. So let's jump into the stories of the week. Alright, our first story is a medical threat that is currently spreading. Hong Kong upgraded to serious on Monday. On Monday, its response to an outbreak of Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, in South Korea, where the numbers of cases jumped and fears grew about the economic impact of the disease, as Reuters reported on Monday. MERS is a disease that appeared in the Middle East a few years ago, and it's become a real menace in the region, and there have been about 445 deaths caused by this disease. In South Korea, there have been 87 infections, and there have been a total of 6 deaths. This isn't uncommon for respiratory-like illnesses to become a fear in Asia. Things like H1N1 becoming a big scare because of the amount of people that could easily become infected in a very short amount of time. A lot of this fear is connected to the SARS outbreak about 10 years ago, 2002 to 2003, and it ultimately killed 800 people. And MERS and SARS are related. They're both carnoviruses. I'm not a science major. I don't know what those are, but I'm pretty sure that those are pretty nasty guys, so it's understandable why they're afraid. While WHO, or the World Health Organization, has said that it believes that South Korea can deal with the outbreak on its own, thousands of people, about 25,000, have actually canceled their trips to South Korea due to fear of infection. Another effect of this outbreak has led Hong Kong to going to the serious level, which is above the alert and below emergency levels within its three-tiered threat system, which actually can cause travel restrictions in and out of Hong Kong. Other countries that have enacted travel restrictions or increased screenings for those who come back to their country from South Korea include Malaysia, Singapore, China, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And this has actually caused the South Korean government to become concerned about their economy because these people aren't coming, spending money. People are closing their shops. People aren't going out and buying if the shops haven't been closed in their area. And this is kind of normal for what to happen when large outbreaks of highly infectious and extremely deadly diseases occur. Now we're coming back to the States to see how the choice to get an abortion, that kind of stuff, is actually under attack. The New York Times reported on Tuesday on the Texas anti-abortion law that a federal appellate court upheld some of the toughest provisions of a Texas abortion law on Tuesday, putting about half of the state's remaining abortion clinics at risk of permanently shutting their doors and leaving the nation's second most populous state with fewer than a dozen clinics across its more than 267,000 square miles. There were 41 when the law was passed, and this is from the New York Times. This basically would close clinics if they weren't already set up for ambulatory surgical procedures in general. It's basically the inspectors would go out, check these abortion clinics, and see if they were up to ambulatory surgical code, and it would include things like dealing with installing janitor closets, adding other things under regulation for safety, things that most people would think Democrats would be for, but this law is actually using it to close abortion clinics. And some would say that this ruling isn't really a surprise because this particular appellate court based in New Orleans is actually known for being very conservative. The attorney for Texas, Ken Paxton, said when the ruling came down that HB 2 both protects the unborn and ensures Texas women are not subjected to unsafe and unhealthy conditions. Today's decision by the Fifth Circuit validates that the people of Texas have authority to establish safe, common-sense standards of care necessary to ensure the health of women. The ACLU, which Republicans hate, even though it fights for civil liberties, in conjunction with medical groups and women's rights advocates, have argued that this is an attempt to block legal, safe abortions under basically a facade of safety. The war on women is real, guys. Don't buy into the hype that the Republican Party and other individuals have been putting out there. Kyle Kulinski recently on his show had a very interesting take on this ruling. I will actually put a link to that below in the description, along with the link to the New York Times article that came along with this. Next, we're going back overseas to a semi-positive story. Quote, Syrian rebels have seized a sprawling military base in a lightning assault, marking the latest in a series of defeats for President Bashar al-Assad's increasingly embattled forces, rebels and activists said, end quote, as The Guardian reported on Tuesday. This was a combined extremist moderate assault, and just as a side note, I will never call any extremist groups like ISIS or al-Nusra or al-Qaeda jihadists, because it legitimizes them and their cause, because jihad is a very sacred and important part of the Islamic faith. Basically, the word jihad translates to struggle, and the idea within Islam is that the internal struggle to make yourself better is more important than an external struggle or a war, and so they're kind of bastardizing the idea of jihad, and so that's why we shouldn't call them jihadists. Anyways, so this was basically an al-Nusra, ISIS, and a Western-backed group called the Southern Front, which is basically the offshoot of the Free Syrian Army, working together to attack this base, and it took 11 hours, and while these numbers weren't independently verified, about 67 Syrian soldiers, regime soldiers, were killed, with 11 rebels dying. And again, these couldn't be independently confirmed by anyone outside of those who participated in the fight. This base, called Brigade 52, is the biggest base in the province of Daraa. It also lies on a very strategic road that is between Jordan and Damascus. And this is good because it dealt with horrible violations that the Assad regime was doing in the area in the form of artillery shelling and barrel bombing civilians into submission. And barrel bombing is basically using barrel bombs, which are barrels stuffed with explosives and metals that, when they explode, just destroy everything in an area, take out every single person in the area, and it's just a horrible thing to behold from what I've read and heard. Now, this development is both good and bad for the rebel forces. It's good because it's dealing with human rights violations in the form of attacking civilians to basically make them not support the rebels, which doesn't logically make sense. And it also takes away a strategic position for the regime, because if they held that area, it would continue to cut lines, the rebel lines between the north and the south, and they're actually making a lot of gains in the area. And Vice in Syria, and Vice did a story recently on it. I will find that and put that in the link below, in a link of that below in the description. However, it does add to the power and combat experience of the extremist forces, and this will ultimately come into play when and if the Assad regime is toppled and the civil war ends, because almost certainly another civil war will start up, and it'll be between the moderate forces and the extremists, because they couldn't agree on how the government that they're trying to set up will ultimately work. And that will just lead to a whole nother mess of problems. Our next story is another of my signature Catholic stories. Time on Tuesday reported that, quote, President Obama's decision to speak before the Catholic Health Association on Tuesday about the morality of caring for society's vulnerable is politically strategic, coming not long before an expected Supreme Court ruling on national subsidies in his signature healthcare reform. The speech highlights key supporters in the Catholic community for Obama's agenda ahead of Pope Francis's September visit to the U.S. End quote. Now, for a little background, when Obama was passing Obamacare, as it's come to be known, the Conference of American Bishops, basically all the American bishops, they have this organization called the Conference of American Bishops that basically translates policy from the Vatican over, from the Pope and the Vatican over in Italy to the dioceses within America, gets rule changes and theology changes into the American Catholic community. American Catholics Conference of American Bishops opposed the law because of the inclusion of contraception in the mandates of the law. And contrasting this, the Catholic Health Association supported it because of what it does in assisting poor and working class families and individuals. And this organization is largely made up of nuns who are known for doing much of the grunt work in dealing with social projects within the Catholic Church. The CHA is continuing this defense as it filed an amicus brief to help defend the law to the Supreme Court during the Supreme Court case that could basically end this very helpful law. Yes, it does have its problems. I think it doesn't go far enough. Requiring everyone to have health insurance is a good idea, but it really should have been a public option. And basically, Obama kind of caved into what Republicans wanted, even though now Republicans are saying it's a government takeover of health care, even though there are several attempted laws from the past that look almost exactly like this piece of legislation. But it did deal with a problem in that a lot of people didn't have health care, and now they do. So that's a good thing. And Obama is trying to get Christians, especially Catholics, on board with his landmark legislation, but it will continue to face opposition, sometimes from Catholic organizations like the Conference of American Bishops and several others. One of them is run by Bill Donahue, I think. His organization is definitely going to oppose it, mostly because of contraception and abortion being part of the law, but they don't really represent the Catholic community as a whole. They just represent the very ultra-conservative part of the intentional Catholic community. And now we're going back overseas to a very interesting story. Quote, the pro-Russian separatist regions of Donetsk People's Republic, or the DPR, and the Luhansk People's Republic, or LPR, just named Crimea as part of Ukraine in the draft amendments to the Constitution of Ukraine, end quote, as Business Insider reported on Tuesday. The draft said, and I will probably butcher most of these names, quote, Article 133, the administrative territorial system of Ukraine contains Autonomous Republic of Crimea, some regions with special status in Donetsk and Luhansk regions, provinces, districts in cities, towns, and villages. Ukraine is composed of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, which was bolded in the article, some regions with special administrative status, the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, Vinnytsia, Volyn, Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, Zhytomyr, Transcarpathian, Zaporizhia, Ivano-Frankivsk, Kyiv, Kiev, Kirovohrad, Luhansk, Lviv, Mykolaiv, Odessa, Poltava, Rivne, Sumy, Ternopil, Kharkiv, Kherson, Khmelnytsky, Cherkasy, Chernihiv regions, city of Kiev and Sevastopol, and the original document was reportedly within the confines of the Minsk Agreement, which was the ceasefire that was signed earlier this year that hasn't really held up, and it was an attempt between Russia and Ukraine and the separatist regions to try to come to some form of an agreement so that they could go on to peace talks. And it did not mention Crimea's status as part of Russia, which was done wholly illegally within the confines of international law. They did, however, backtrack on Wednesday, stating that, quote, the DNR and LNR, of course, consider Crimea is a part of Russia, envoy said. However, our republics would ideally like to become part of the Russian Federation. Alright, today I'm going to cut off at 5 stories instead of the usual 6 this week. So I'm Joshua Zeller, your cultural Catholic, signing off.